Good evening. My name is Zehr, and I work in UBC Community Engagement. And I'm very keen and honored to be here and moderating this evening. I do want to start with the acknowledgement that we're gathered and UBC is located on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of Musqueam people. Tonight is the second in a series of dialogues and discussion around this refugee symposium in week long. Last night, the series began with a panel on breaking the cycle. And the panel started with a welcome from Deborah from Musqueam. And some of you in the room here may have been there last night. But for me, the welcome from Deborah is really, it was a really strong reminder of the continuous generosity of welcoming newcomers at Musqueam for generations. It was also a reminder how this land has been used for learning and for sharing of knowledge like we're doing this evening, also for generations long before UBC existed. And certainly a reminder of the continuous need to be done, or work to be done on reconciliation, not just globally, as is the focus of the panels, but here in Canada. So it was a very meaningful way to begin the panel. I also wanted to talk a little bit about a few highlights from yesterday, breaking the cycle. Because I think it sets a really important global and broad context and stage for this evening's discussion. Last night, we started by hearing from Catherine Brunner, who is the dean of Aller School of Law, talking about positive aspects about international refugee law, but also there was part of what she was saying, which I think was incredibly powerful. It's likely that most people in the room have heard how the United Nations Affiliation for Refugees estimates about 60 million people who are displaced in the world, 25 million people who are likely meeting that definition of UNHCR refugee. Catherine went on to talk about if everything in the world were status quo in terms of countries who are receiving refugees for resettlement and durable solution, we would just continue at the levels that they are today. It would be more than 230 years before only the 25 million might have an opportunity for a durable solution. So clearly, there is massive global systemic change that's needed. And we are indeed in a very significant humanitarian crisis. We did hear from two individuals last night, Robbie Weissman, who came to Canada in 1949 as a Holocaust survivor, and Tina Curdy, and to believe in Alan Curdy, the young boy whose picture on the beach had such a global impact. Both stories really difficult to hear, and for probably many people in the room difficult to comprehend. For others, perhaps not so difficult to comprehend. But what I found through those discussions was also incredible hope and inspiration, and planting the seed of hope, as Tina referred to, not only to raise consciousness, but also to really call to action and to be doing something. We also heard from Chris Friesen from Immigrant Settlement Services BC, and he spoke of hope and commitment as well, and through innovation of the kinds of supports that are happening on the West Coast. In particular, he referenced the recent opening of the Welcome Center in East Vancouver, a very unique, one-of-a-kind kind of facility and hub and wraparound support services for refugees and refugee deployments, which, talking about the kind of responses and supports that are happening locally, is a good segue into this evening's panel. This panel this evening, particularly finding Refuge, refugee resettlement, and UBC engagement, and the benefits of generosity, is intended to showcase not only benefits to refugees, but also the benefits to society as a whole when there is a response that is to address something like the global refugee crisis as we're in. Whether those be more formal resettlement mechanisms from the government or from service organizations, or nonprofit organizations or student-led initiatives on campus. We'll be hearing about those kinds of supports. I don't think Celine is here. Celine? Okay, there was just a gentleman who wanted to talk about a few services, but I don't think he's arrived yet, so maybe we could go right into the panelists. And I'll invite you to come, you're welcome to stand or be at the table. And we're going to start with Katie Rosenberger. Welcome. Katie's Executive Director of the Affiliation of Multicultural Societies and Service Agencies. You have full bios in the pamphlet at the door. And she's going to start with a provincial, national lens on resettlement efforts, where people are coming from, kinds of services, and kind of lay the stage and groundwork for the discussion. So, Katie.
Thank you so much, Deb. I feel really little back here. Thank you so much for inviting me here today to come and share just a really general overview of how Canada welcomes refugees to our country. I'd like to thank Lindsay for inviting me today. And it's interesting, as Deb was giving us an overview of who was here yesterday, Deborah Sparrow also did the welcome for our AGM this year, and really set the stage for some critical thinking around the role that First Nations people here have continued to play and will continue to play well into the future in terms of newcomer settlement. And so it was a real treat to have her speak. Catherine DeBurn was our keynote speaker at our AGM this year, so I'm feeling like we're really on track with having the right people come and speak for AMSSA. And then Chris Friesen, who she mentioned, is one of our members. And Chris is also the chair of CSA-ACSA, which is a great big long acronym that I'm not going to get into right now. But that is kind of the association of associations of settlement service providers across Canada. And so we do a lot of work with him at the national level as well. So it's great to see that that everybody's engaging at this time in this matter. So I'm, like I said, going to take us through a really brief overview, and I'm going to try to keep it as high level as possible. So obviously there's a great deal of more detail that I could get into, and I will say now that if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them either now or at a later time. So first, just to tell you a little bit about AMSSA and what we do. So AMSSA is the Affiliation of Multicultural Societies and Service Agencies of British Columbia. We are an association, and we have approximately 70 members. We work with hundreds of community stakeholders and agencies who serve immigrants and newcomers to build culturally inclusive communities. We develop and facilitate training sessions, online learning opportunities, and networking events to build capacity of settlement service providers. And so in the province of British Columbia right now, we have over 99 organizations that are providing settlement services that are funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, so IRCC. And we work with all of those organizations. And then we convene groups at the provincial level, at the regional level. So when I say regional, we're talking Western regions, so that's pretty much everything this side of Ontario, including the Yukon. And then we also work with the federal government and provincial government looking at policies and funding policies to ensure that the best possible outcomes for newcomers in the province. So today I'm going to talk about refugee pathways to Canada. I'm going to talk about the resettlement commitments that Canada has made, not just to Syrians, but also to give you some context of the fact that Canada has been making resettlement commitments for many, many years now. We'll talk about refugee arrivals in Canada and into BC specifically, supports for refugees in Canada, and then key issues for refugee resettlement. So, Unlisted refugees, which is the first bullet we have here, are refugees whose initial settlement, and it's for up to 1 year, is entirely supported by the Government of Canada. So they're referred to Canada for resettlement by a referral organization such as the UNHCR. So they come as permanent residents when they arrive in Canada, and they have access to full settlement supports as permanent residents. Privately sponsored refugees are referred for resettlement by a private sponsor, and we're going to learn a lot more about that later on in this evening. And they agree to provide financial and other support for the refugee for 1 year. So those individuals do come as permanent residents and are welcome to access settlement services. And settlement service providers are really working hard with private sponsors right now to build those connections. But their financial obligation to the refugees rests with the sponsorship organization and not with the federal government. And then there's a combination of the two, which are called Blended Visa Office Referrals, or BVORs, which is the acronym, and that refers to people who come through the UNHCR, but they are matched with a private sponsorship group. And then there's kind of a 50-50 split. Half the first year they are eligible for funding through the federal government, and then the other half of the year the private sponsors will provide financial support to those individuals. Then the other refugees that arrive in Canada are refugee claimants. So refugee claimants arrive in Canada and then make a refugee claim either inland or once they come to the port of entry. And after making a claim, they have a hearing with the Immigration and Refugee Board to determine if they're eligible to remain in Canada as refugees. It's a challenging situation because when they do arrive, they are not eligible for any funding supports through the federal government. And until they've had that hearing, which can take a long time to get, and receive protected persons status, they are not eligible for any funding or funding support. So just to look at some of the resettlement commitments that have been made, and a note to kind of share with you some of the multiple multi-year funding commitments that Canada has engaged in. Some of those include, at this time, 23,000 Iraqis from the time of 2009 until 2015, 4,000 Eritreans in Sudan and Ethiopia from 2014 to 2018. So keep in mind the commitment is made to the country where the refugees are currently located. So the commitment is to Sudan and Ethiopia to resettle 4,000 Eritrean refugees, and 2,500 Congolese in Tanzania and Burundi from 2005 to 2017. So moving now to Syria and the commitments there. The government made 3 commitments around Syrian refugees shortly after taking office. As many of you remember, this was a really heated topic during the election campaign, and so very quickly upon taking office, decisions were made, and they were very ambitious decisions, and so there was some modifications that was made once people on the ground realized that they needed a little bit more time. So the government committed to bring 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada by the end of 2015, and then they later revised that to have everybody here by the end of 2016. And this included all streams of refugees, so this is GARs, BVORs, and PSRs. The initial thought was 25,000 GARs by the end of 2015, which it just, between processing times and some of the other challenges, it just wasn't possible. So it expanded to include privately sponsors and BVORs, and also they gave an extra 2 months. The commitment included to bring 25,000 Syrian GARs to Canada by the end of 2016. So here we are now, November the 3rd, and we still have quite a ways to go to honor that commitment. Apparently it's going to happen, so we'll see. The sector is currently ramping up to receive a large number. We were meeting with IRCC last week, and they were saying that we're expecting over 1,000 Syrian refugees in the province before the end of the year. And the government has also said that they would make every effort to process PSR applications for Syrian refugees that were received before March 31st of 2016, by the end of 2016, but now they're saying maybe into early 2017. So this is important because sponsorship processing times can be very, very long. They were sped up during the initial phase of 2016, but we're starting to see the slowdown again, and so it's unfortunate. You know, one of the challenges that has come up around that is it's a massive undertaking for sponsorship groups to mobilize, to secure housing, to secure jobs, to secure community support, and then they're just sitting and waiting. And those housing opportunities and those community support opportunities are starting to go by the wayside while we're all just sitting here processing people. That's my personal spin on it. Try not to show my biases. So refugee arrivals, the green bars show the arrivals for all of 2015, and then the blue bars show the arrivals for the first half of 2016. So that's up until the end of June 2016, which is the latest information that we have available. There's anecdotal information, but this is the latest data. Resettled refugees, including GARs, PSRs, and B4s. These figures are for all countries of origin. More refugees arrived both in Canada and as a whole to BC in the first half of 2016 than in all of 2015. Even for refugee claimants, they are on pace to see an increased number this year compared to last. Refugee claimant numbers are really high right now, and there are a lot of challenges posed with that. Kirsten Walter, who I believe is speaking or has spoken on one of the panels tomorrow. Kirsten Walter is the Director of Settlement Orientation Services, which works with refugee claimants. Again, a very, very inadequately funded group of individuals. And in 2015, refugee claimants actually made up more of the refugee arrivals in British Columbia than GARs, B4s, and PSRs. So there's a lot of work to be done there. They're seeing some major challenges right now with refugees coming from the United States, which is typically not something that we see because there's this safe third-party agreement. However, there seems to be somewhere in Kurdish-speaking Iraq that is providing visas that are like a temporary work visa, and people are coming over on those visas and then coming to the land border, making it across the land border, and then going straight to Settlement Orientation Services in Vancouver and claiming refugee status. And so we're seeing more Kurdish refugees in BC than we've ever seen before. And we have very, very limited resources, particularly around translation, to be able to support these refugees. So it's a challenge that we're really working on right now. We're trying to support Settlement Orientation Services on, as they are one of our members as well. So arrivals to Canada, November 4th, 2015, which is 1 year ago tomorrow, until October 16th, 2016. 32,737 Syrian refugees have arrived in Canada. Between the start of the new government's term until, because I believe they went in, I'm giving it 2 minutes last time. Oh God, I gotta go faster, I can go faster. I'm going to stop halfway. Between the new government taking office on March 1st, 1,957 refugees from Syria have arrived in BC. And those 1,957 refugees are made up of 456 families. This is the most up-to-date federal information stats, because keep in mind that's March 2016. But there has been quite a drop in volume after March and then throughout the summer. Like I said, we're kind of ramping up for another round. And then although GARs are destined to only a handful of communities in the province, Syrian refugees have actually settled in 55 communities in BC, mostly through private sponsorships, but also through what's called the hub and spoke model, which I'll describe if I have time. So supports for refugees in Canada. All GARs receive resettlement assistance program support when they arrive. This includes support at the airport when they arrive. The CAN program, administered by Success, will greet refugees at the airport when they arrive. They receive temporary accommodations and support finding permanent accommodations. Typical RAP services are supposed to last for about 2 weeks. With the arrival of Syrian refugees and the really large family sizes, we were seeing refugees in temporary housing up to 3-4 months. I believe there was one family in one of the smaller communities that was in a hotel for 5 months until they could find adequate housing, because we're just not equipped to house families of 8, 9, 10, 12 people. So that's been a major challenge. The guards receive income support for the first year that they're here. And it's based on provincial assistance rates, which are not high. So a family of 4 would receive approximately $1,300 to $1,400 a month. They receive a one-time starter package for clothes and staples and a furniture allowance. And so if you want more information on this, ISS of BC, they are the hub for refugee services right now. And so if you just go onto their website, ISS of BC, there's a lot of information there if you're looking for more information, or you can certainly contact me and I'll put you in the right direction. So supports for refugees in Canada. Since resettled refugees arrive in Canada with permanent residency status, they're entitled to settlement supports as well. So RAP is supposed to be short-term, and then settlement supports would kick in. And settlement supports are available to people with permanent residency for 5 years upon arrival in Canada. So settlement supports include a needs assessment, referrals, information and orientation, language training, employment-related supports, community connections, and support services to enable clients to access those services. So supports for refugees in Canada, settlement service provider organizations, so that would be our member organizations and those other organizations that are funded by the federal government. They range from really large organizations like ISS, Success, Mosaic, that many of you have heard, to small, little, tiny, organizations in Smithers. We have one organization that has 1.5 FTE staff. Neighborhood houses have contracts with the federal government and have an amazing model. There's 2 RAP providers in BC, so resettlement assistance providers. One is ISS of BC, and then very recently, in the middle of this, the refugee resettlement, they opened another one in Victoria. So there's two RAP providers in BC. So I'm going, and then the other thing just to know is those RAP providers then have what I said with the hub and spoke model, where they can send refugees to 5 different communities. So those are Abbotsford, Nanaimo, Prince George, Kelowna, and Vernon. So my last point was just around some of the key issues. And I won't get into too many details. Maybe we'll have an opportunity a little later to discuss these. But really, they're not new for the most part. Where we're finding the largest challenges is around the size of families. We're looking at families with 8, 9 children. We have one family that we're working with, an organization that has 13 children. And so finding housing for these large families has been very, very challenging. English classes, wait lists for English classes are atrocious. Refugees do have priority to get in for those English classes, but they're waiting a really long time. There's challenges in the school system. There's mental health challenges that are just so hard right now. These are very, very traumatized individuals. The children have gone through a great deal of trauma. Many of them haven't had traditional schooling or have been away from it for a very long time. So having families who have suffered trauma go into a traditional LINK classroom, LINK is the language instruction for newcomers, has been highly problematic. And then the last piece I just want to address is around social media. This is the first time that we have ever seen social media play such a key role in the resettlement of refugees, and so it has had its own very unique impact on the experience. So I will stop there and happy to answer questions later.
We're moving a bit from the broader societal response and government response to getting into a bit of the policymaker role We've got Lisa Brunner, PhD student for Education Studies and lead of the UBC Migration Network and Refugee Resettlement, looking at integration, immigration policy from a macro perspective, how refugees are selected for resettlement, and difficulties faced by policymakers. And being one of those for quite a while in this area, I'm fascinated and really looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the Loot Institute. I think this is an awesome way to bring people to the opera, but also give some context to it. I'm just really excited to go this week and help us set up, so thank you so much. So when I saw that the title had been changed to Benefits of Generosity and its relationship to refugee resettlement and UBC student engagement, thank you, it made me reflect on, is Canada generous in its refugee resettlement? And so today that's what I'd like to respond to, and I thank you, Katie, for setting, thank you so much for setting up the context of Canada specifically with the past year or so. So I'm just going to start with a brief overview of resettlement in Canada in relation to other countries and Canada's past, and then talk a little bit about what that term generosity might mean. So to start off, in the past 10 years or so, Canada's refugee intake has fluctuated between about 20 and 30,000 annually, approximately. And that includes refugees in the three broader categories that Katie alluded to. So first of all would be asylum seekers, and Canada would be typically described as refugee claimants. And in terms of Canada's numbers, this is something that's quite difficult for Canadian policymakers to control on one side. However, Canada is quite geographically isolated, and it's very difficult to get a visa to come on a plane to enter Canada and to even make the claim. So relative to other countries, it's very difficult to actually get to Canada to make that asylum claim. If we look at government-assisted refugees, this is something that typically would be controlled by the government. So as Katie alluded to, there are negotiations that decide how many numbers are coming from specific countries. However, what a lot of people are maybe not aware of is that until recently, the government-assisted refugees actually had to pay their own transportation costs and also pay interest on that in the form of a loan. So to give a brief story about that, I did 3 research projects with Immigrant Services Society that they directed, and were looking for some data about their settlement services and how people were experiencing the settlement process. And the first project was with refugees from Aceh, Indonesia. It was a very small group of individuals, mostly men. And a major impediment to their settlement was this transportation loan. So one reason was because for those in the community, the majority were practicing Muslims, and the idea of paying interest on a loan was not something in line with their values. So the fear of having to pay interest on a loan was looming over their heads as a very, very unsettling thing. So rather than go and wait for the language classes, they went directly into the labor market. And unfortunately, that's something a lot of refugees have to do because of the wait times. They also were impacted by a tsunami that had just happened. This was back in 2006, and the epicenter was right near Aceh. And so there was a lot of money that they wanted to send back to their families who were now in an emergency crisis at that time. So I share this story because the generosity of Canada and Canadian policymakers really changes based on the context of the policymaker and the government climate at the time. So when we initially disseminated the research findings from this project, at the time the Conservative government's response was, this is very troubling. Some of the RAP, the money that was given during the first year, is being remitted to non-Canadians outside of Canada back to Aceh. There's a problem with that. So that was their reaction to our findings. This current Liberal government, they actually used the research findings to eliminate the transportation loan for the Syrian refugees that were coming. So that was a different interpretation of the research findings. On the other hand, they only are bringing families or single women with children. So single men were not included in that. and this was also part of the research findings. So I bring this to say that for those of us who are researchers in this kind of field, we can only show the research, but we can't control how it's used. And I think there's different interpretations of what generosity would be. Is it generosity for Canadians, and that should be the priority of the policy, or is it generosity on a larger scale, prioritizing refugees? And then I also wanted to comment on the privately sponsored refugees. So this would typically be, there's some community groups or groups of 5 Canadians or permanent residents who can come together and pay for the cost of resettlement. It's an amazing program, and a lot of refugee resettlements that initially happened when the term refugee came into usage after World War II was done by private groups. And so there's a strong history in a lot of religious communities and also secular community groups in doing this research, this resettlement. Another way to look at it could also be a neoliberalization of the resettlement process. So this means that the government is taking credit sometimes for large numbers of refugees who are being resettled, but the actual amount of money and support that the government is contributing towards that, much of it is being, I shouldn't say much, but there is a significant amount that's being shouldered by private citizens in that way. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You're going to hear about the WUSC program, which is a program I think is amazing and an awesome example of private resettlement. But I do raise the question of what does it mean if we're shifting the government's role to private citizens? Is the Canadian government actually being as generous as it could be in terms of that? And especially how the numbers are used to compare to other countries. So in comparison with some other countries, we're just going to look at 2015 for the moment, which with data that is reliable, but for 2016 these numbers are going to fluctuate significantly because there was so much attention to the Syrian refugee crisis at the moment, and also the increase in asylum made in Europe. So in the United States, in 2015 there were 66,000 refugees that were resettled, specifically just the resettlement part, and that's over half of the global total. So the U.S. does do a very significant chunk of the refugee resettlement. And Canada comes second. Canada in 2015, the total was about 20,000. And the next country that does resettlement in order would be Australia with about 9,000. So Canada's more than double the following country. So if you just look at resettlement, Canada's doing pretty good, and you could use the term generous. Another side of this is also the political use of resettlement and the way that it functions for the state itself. So as Katie showed, that the countries choose the resettlement based on negotiations with countries and that are hosting refugees, but also with other resettlement receiving countries. So I was a consultant at a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. that worked with the State Department to develop orientation materials. And so I had the opportunity to observe a conversation where the State Department of the United States was negotiating with some other heads of state that would do this resettlement negotiation. And it really was looking for the areas in the country, the areas in the world that had a geopolitical benefit to the current State Department's mission at the time. So in terms of the benefit of generosity and what countries benefit from resettlement, they also get benefits from that process for their own geopolitical needs. And I think that's something that's often understated. And if you look at other metrics, okay, so we're talking about 20 to 30,000 approximately resettled refugees total in Canada, including asylum seekers. But in 2015, Germany had almost 500,000 asylum seekers, so they're not accepted, but people making claims just in 2015. That's a huge number, and Sweden and Finland have also accepted a very high number relative to their population. So if we look at countries in Europe, where there's a very significant refugee asylum seeker numbers that are so different from those in Canada. If we look at where refugees are hosted, as many of you probably know, it's not in the wealthy countries of the world. So these are not necessarily countries where they're offering a permanent solution, such as the equivalence of permanent residency for citizenship. But Turkey currently has more than 2.5 million refugees living in its country, and then the countries below would be Pakistan with 1.6 million, Lebanon, which has 183 refugees for every 1,000 residents, which is the highest ratio in the world, Iran, Ethiopia, and Jordan. So when we also look at where refugees are currently being hosted, the vast majority are not in wealthy countries in the world. So we do see lots of feel-good media coverage, especially of Canada's response to the Syrian refugee crisis at the moment. So in July, the New York Times published a very popular front page article that was celebrating Canada's private resettlement of Syrians. It was one of the most commented on stories of the New York Times this year. And so many Americans are saying, why can't we be like Canadians? This is amazing, they're doing a great job, we need to improve. And it's true, Canada looks really good compared to the United States, especially at this moment, but in terms of the current refugee crisis, in comparison with the United States, it's really helping Canada's image in that way because the Liberal government stepped up and made that commitment. And then, the UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon praised Canada's generosity. He said it was generous and compassionate commitment. There's been a lot of public focus on Canada. I don't know how many of you went to Immigrant Services Society's call for volunteers at the Vancouver Public Library. Was anyone there? It was in the basement of the library, and they had it multiple nights. The entire room was filled. If you've been in that room, it's a huge ballroom. Tons of people wanted to volunteer. The problem is that a lot of them didn't have the skills that were needed at the moment, which at the moment for refugees that are being resettled and destined to Vancouver would be housing, or housing that's near transit so that they can access the kind of specialized services that they're going to need. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for settlement agencies to anticipate the numbers, especially in this time, of big promises and uncertain dates and timelines for settlement agencies. So there was an outpouring of support for this one specific group of refugees, but it was really difficult actually for the settlement agencies even to have the capacity to manage the volunteers in the first place. And so that can also be directed back to the government's support and funding of the settlement agencies and what they're expected to do. So generosity implies that the giver has something more to give, and that giving is a choice. And I would also argue that the Canadian government and many Canadians have more, in large part due in part to an exploitative colonial past in a larger perspective. So I'm not saying that refugee crises are directly impacted by wealthy nations, but a lot of conflicts can trace their roots back to colonialism, or more broadly, the forces of global capitalism that wealthy nations very disproportionately benefit from. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves about why, just this year, 1 million refugees and migrants were willing to cross the Mediterranean, even though almost 4,000 drowned and went missing. Why are people making that risk? And do we actually have are we really in the position to say, I choose to offer you this gift of coming to Canada, as opposed to, is it really our moral imperative to look more closely at larger forces? So just to touch on student engagement, I would say Canada can do way more. As students, we can demand way more, but we also have to be critical when we're thinking about the forces that are at play. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a challenging confusing, complicated landscape. It's emotional, it's about things that are here, but also things that are out there. And really important to be thinking about those questions and looking at different perspectives. Sarah Cameron is our next speaker, International Transition Advisor at the International Student Development, really long title. Sarah's going to be talking about the role of the Rural University Service in Canada and some broader refugee student engagement at UBC.
Thank you very much, and I want to echo what Lisa said. I'm so excited that this conversation is happening. I think this series, more than short, is such a welcome dialogue on this campus, and one that I think a lot of us are engaging in, and nice to see different faces in these conversations, or see us all coming together. So I'm here to talk about the WUSC Student Refugee Program at UBC. Okay. I'll preface by saying I'm only in my 5th week in this position. I have worked with this program in a different capacity at UBC for a few years, but UBC does have a really long and proud history of supporting student refugees. So specifically, WUSC is a unique partnership, this 3-way partnership between WUSC, which is an Ottawa-based nonprofit organization that focuses on youth empowerment and education. They operate to do selection of student refugees per year. There's a student levy just over $5 that every grad and undergraduate student at UBC pays to cover the first 12 months of living expenses, some of the resettlement costs, so travel loans, resettlement fees to WUSC. They provide social support, cultural support, emotional, academic supports, and they are fantastic. They were one of the oldest, if not maybe the oldest student club at UBC. There's been a local committee since 1947 every single year. So it's a nice, proud, long history. And then there's UBC, the institution. And UBC provides tuition subsidy, tuition bursary for the entire degree, as well as the first 2 years of housing. The second 2 years at this stage are subsidized housing if students are living on campus. We also provide a network of advisors, so me, but also colleagues who are enrollment services professionals, so doing financial supports, academic advisors. We work with housing, we work with admissions, so it's a really interconnected network of support focused around our sponsored students. At any given time at UBC, we have in the range of 25 to 30 sponsored students, and that number is increasing. So I realize this is a confusing process and program, but really thinking about why, what the WUSC Student Refugee Program is, but also why it's important. I think that Lisa did such a nice job of talking about those different types of relationships, but I think that WUSC is a nice feel-good example of what's happening and a lot of years of work that's gone into it. So the Student Refugee Program was established in 1978. UBC has been sponsoring student refugees since 1981. So we have, I believe, over 80 alumnus at this stage working in all sectors and across Canada and around the world. WUSC is the only organization in the world that pairs education and resettlement. So our students arrive in Canada as permanent residents, but also with admission to a university, college, or CSHAP. This is a fantastic feature. It's a peer-to-peer model. So really the local committee is working with WUSC very carefully. So the design of it is students supporting students. So WUSC is really important in that they're selecting and providing education opportunities for exceptional youth, but also that we're providing opportunity for youth in Canada to engage in some pretty exceptional leadership opportunities, some incredible experience in identifying the complexity of global refugee issues, of navigating insane political situations and government situations to help students get here. WUSC provides opportunities for leadership development through international forum and other types of seminars as well. Across Canada, $3 million is levied, so students across this country are really supporting this program and supporting other youth to come. And I think that it's really important to note that the student refugee program has a very different admission process to any other student on our campus. A few years ago, we asked the question of our sponsored students, what is a student refugee? And the answer that really came back was that it's about being a student. It's the choice to be a student and to pursue studies. Students go through an 18-month process. It's very rigorous. It's highly competitive. And in the end, while they do have a placement, they don't have a choice. So if you ask a student at UBC why they chose UBC, there's no answer. They chose Canada, they chose education. And that is a really unique model. So it leads us into questions about why it's important to be supporting student refugees. So it's important because we're talking about access to high quality education, and in that conversation we know that admission to the institution is not enough. We are a complex place. We have a huge amount of nuance. We have a group of students who are arriving with an excellent amount of academic capacity and skill and resilience, but without the prior knowledge that most of our students, all of our students, have benefit of, which is researching the institution they're arriving at, thinking about their programs in relation to that institution. So building in those early supports is really critical. In this arrangement, UBC also operates as a site of resettlement, and we have fantastic partners in the community, but we also know how far away we are and how isolated we are and how busy the life of a student is. And we ask our students to come in right away and jump into all of those pieces. So really thinking about what being a venue, being a site of resettlement means, and also what that means in terms of how we support students and how we look at success and how we are able to provide a lot of those here without taxing some of our community partners who we know are already doing more than they can. I think that part of why supporting students, student refugees is so important is to really identify and be aware of what global education looks like. I think many of us call ourselves international education professionals, and I think we have lots of ideas what that means. I think what we learn through our WUSC students is a real definition of what that looks like, are the real, what classrooms really can look like, what the strength it takes to choose education, and how hard it can be to access that, and how easily we can forget that, and we can think about education as a mandatory piece of our lives, and what that looks like when it's not, and when it's a choice. I think that the reasons that we support student refugees are that we understand that these students are coming in as the survivors of hardship, of conflict, of huge amounts of personal struggle, family struggle, and they're coming on their own. And so really looking at how important that is as we talk about dialogues on our campus around mental health and well-being, and setting up those supports very early so that students have access to them, students are able to consider their own well-being within this context. And I think supporting student refugees and the WUSC program in particular is so important at UBC because of our desire to respond. I think our desire to be a generous community. Last year when we saw the UBC Responds notion, I think lots of people were looking for places to ask questions and figure out how to put their effort into things. And I think that WUSC is an opportunity to learn from people with lived experience, learn from professionals who are working in this area of settlement, to learn from graduates of these programs, learn from students who are already engaging in this. So supporting this program, supporting these students is so critical in our ability to respond. And we see generally that this group of students can be undervalued on our campus. see chronic unemployment or underemployment. So creating the supports to address those things are so critical. We know that a good education, good work experience will be critical factors in economic freedom and independence as they move forward. So really addressing those questions as early on as we can is such a critical piece. We're going to skip. So thinking as we move forward at UBC, we have seen an increased investment in the WUSC Student Refugee program, but also increased interest in how to support other students who would identify as student refugees or recently resettled refugees. Last year, the AMS and GSS students all voted in a referendum to increase the fee, so to double the fee. So this year we've gone from typically hosting 4 students per year to now 8 students per year. Along with that, we've seen an institutional commitment. I was hired into this job. Previously, my colleague held this portfolio along with quite a lot of other very significant work on this campus. We've seen increased access to housing on campus, increased amounts of funding available, but also increased partnerships on our campus, increased interest in student employment, in other opportunities, increased interest from faculty members to discuss how to incorporate these voices into their classrooms when they come up. So I think that's a really critical thing. I think we have a moment right now where we can also really look at how to be creative and innovative in our programming, to give students the space to opt into these resources. So thinking about other recently resettled students, other vulnerable students, and how they can connect in with a group of students who are more visible in a program where there is a little bit more awareness, and how they can have more peer-to-peer support, how they can access myself and my colleagues who are thinking about these students. So providing visibility so that students know why they would self-identify, why they would come see us, why they would connect in with WUSC students, I think is a critical opportunity. And also looking at how we engage with our community, how we push off of our campus. As we know, our students need to push off of our campus eventually. So how do we do that? How do we provide them the opportunity to connect into community organizations? But how do we also provide community organizations the opportunity to connect in with us? So providing youth in our community who might be recently resettled, who may be recent immigrants, opportunities to learn about how UBC or post-secondary education is feasible and accessible. And there is a moment right now where we're seeing increase in student awards and access to those awards. So it's a great moment to work for WUSC. I might have the best job on this campus. But it's also a really important moment to set the tone. I don't think we always have such attention on the politics of refugee resettlement or so many resources available or people interested in supporting. So taking advantage of those where we can, making best use of, but also continuing this very long history. 35 years of student refugees at UBC is such a significant thing, and not allowing our current political climate to fog our long memory and to let us forget that we have been demonstrating these values for a very long time. Thank you.
These people come and be a part of the community here and bring the assets that they do bring. And our next speaker is a prime example of that. Kuol and Biong is a UBC undergrad student and also engaged with WUSC, and we'll talk about that. But he's also kindly agreed to share some of his personal experience.
Thank you so much. My voice. The last time I was here, I was like, wow. I wish I would have come here because I was sitting there. I would like to say thank you for invitation and to give me the opportunity to open a chapter of my life. And also student. And the last time I heard about Canada was in 2007 when I was watching a movie in the Kuol refugee camp, the Delta Post 2. So in that incident, when Chiang Norris changed his passport instead of US to Canada, and he was passing in Beirut, where he gave his passport, and someone looked at it and said, "Are you from Canada?" And he said, "Yes." "Oh, you are so lucky. You have a beautiful country. I love Canada." I didn't know where was Canada by then. And when we talk of generosity, that was them. And that was exactly what the person was saying. And I didn't know that one day I would be part of that, I would be a beneficiary of that generosity of Canada. I'm so happy about that. The last time I was told to write my life story was when I applied for this scholarship, the WUSC. And they just give you one page to write your life story. And I ended up writing five pages. And they were like, "Why are you giving us so much like this?" I said, "You asked about my life story. And this is what I'm giving you because, in fact, I have so much to give you. It's just that I have to write this small one." So when this thing come up and I look at it and I was like, what will I say now? Like it's so much in my mind. But I'm the example of refugee who has benefited this dynamic world we are in and the diversity that is being shown by so many countries in the world. I am from South Sudan. My name is Kuol, as you guys have heard already. And I am a victim of the second civil war of South Sudan and Sudan. And by then it was Sudan itself. So I didn't even know when I was born and when the hunger strike, I think this was 1998, when I asked Mom, what's going on? And she said, "We were permanently displaced when you were 3 months old. And since then, we have never had a permanent house. And I've never returned here now. And I don't even know how to live like that." So, and that's how life has been. We have been up and down until my dad says it's time for you to leave the country in 1999 to go to a refugee camp in Kenya. It's located in the northern part of Kenya. It's called Kakuma. And that's when I came to Kakuma as a refugee. And that's the first time I heard the word refugee. In fact, by then I didn't even know English. So, and I've been studying under the UN protection. And when I came here, I took a book, the history, and then I learned about the formation of the UN in 1945. I was like, wow, what if these leaders, the Roosevelt and Stalin, did not sit down with other leaders and say, let's form UN? What would have been the effect of so many people who are playing their country, of someone like me? Like, what would have been the results of all the fighting that's going on in the world, that always result into displacement of someone? So that's how I came as a refugee. I started under the UN. And when you are in a refugee camp, you are sure that absolutely you don't even know tomorrow. Because first you don't even know when where you left will be settled, like when will the problem be solved, and what will happen to you. So I choose to go to school under a very severe condition. The northern part of Kenya is 35 degrees. It's so hot, and I took it on. I said, let me study instead, because there's nothing much to do. I have to study. And when I finished my primary school, I got a scholarship from the refugee program called ERS, Jesuit Refugee Program, that takes students to Kenyan school in high school. And then I said, this is the beginning of the future. Though I didn't know what will future look like. like where else will I go after 4 years of high school? Now that I got a scholarship. So I went to high school. And the question that bothered me is what will happen next after my high school? Because in the camp, refugee camp, there's no university. If you finish high school, that's the end. You can go and teach, or you can just stay because there are no jobs in the camp. And there's nowhere you go. So that is how, after I finished my high school, is when I came to know about the WUSC. And the WUSC, the World University Center of Canada, like Sarah said, it is based in Ottawa. And it sponsors the refugee students that do well in the high school, in the refugee. In Kenya, like in Kakuma and Dadaab, and then the other side of Kenya, the northeast, and other places. So my life and what has been pushing me here today was hope. Even if I don't know what will happen tomorrow, I do hope that something will come around. And it will not find me staying the way I am, or neither will I involve myself in whatever I am doing. I should be doing so much. And that's how I arrived here. And when I arrived here, I was so like, this is the University of Canada. And there's no country in this world that could be more proud than Canada when coming to receiving people, when coming to open their heart to the people who are desperate. So the UBC, I joined the club, the WUSC club. I'm part of it. I'm part of the Student Refugee Program, and that is SRP. And when I joined, I saw so many opportunities. I saw the capacity that University UBC was. And when the crisis came out in the Syrian crisis, I took the risk of going around with other the advisors and the other stakeholders on campus and mobilizing the students to push for the increase of the number of students to include the Syrian refugees. Because when I always hear about the news of the people running away from the country, it just touches me because it's just me. We mobilized the university and the turnout was overwhelming. We went under the petition, we signed the petition, we went with the referendum, and we passed. The referendum was students voting to allow the number to be doubled. We used to sponsor 4 students every year here in UBC. And we proposed that we need to sponsor other 4 students so that we have 8. And that would mean we are including the Syrian refugees who have left, who have finished their high school. They are now displaced and they don't have anywhere to pursue their education. Just like me. I have had countless sleepless nights to make sure that something comes up because I feel I am the one in that situation. And at long last, we passed the referendum, and this year, we got the good news. We have sponsored 3 more students from Syria. Add to the number that we used to sponsor before, we have 7 that have arrived, and 1 is on the way. So far, we have demonstrated the university that this this talk is all about, the University of Canada. And it is all over. And that is exactly what Canada is. And that's what the UBC and the students have demonstrated. And last year I was the president, this year I'm the ambassador. Because I want to push forward and see the engagement that we all should come in, whether you are a refugee or whether you are a domestic or whether you are international, we all have to find a common ground to promote this universal crisis management that's coming up, so that we can try to accommodate, try to bring in those who have despair. I don't want to argue that we should not bring them in because we want to settle them there. That's another topic. Because more political. But we need to make sure we do small things at a time, and that's exactly what UBC is doing. So we'll be sponsoring 80 students every year, and that is so much. Increase of one person to come to Canada here and go to UBC is so much, because it is just the transformation, the highest transformation that can happen in a refugee life. You are sponsored, given permanent resident, and taken to UBC, a school so competitive that you cannot even imagine. And you are given a 5-year scholarship that takes you through your degree. What else do someone ask for? I would like to say, as we as humans, we have every responsibility, no matter where we come from, to care for each other, to stand for each other. And together we can defeat any barrier that comes on our way. And today, I would like to say thank you so much for visiting us.
Our final panelist is perhaps not a usual suspect around the policy table or related to refugee settlement and refugee issues, but great for the organizers to invite you, Elizabeth. Fascinating topic on the psychological benefits of generosity, and Elizabeth Dunn is Associate Professor in Psychology here.
All right, so first I just have to say I'm humbled to be part of this panel of people who've had incredible direct experiences and just many, many years of expertise. So I'm really new to this whole scene, and in fact, I have to admit that I only had sort of passing familiarity with the global refugee crisis until I saw this picture that, of course, touched so many people. And I have a child who was the same age at the time, and along with many of my friends, I felt like we have to do something. It's not enough anymore to just make a donation to the UNHCR or something. We need to do something more meaningful. And so friends of mine and sort of friends of friends got together and formed a group that we ended up naming Vancouver Friends of Refugees. And basically we asked everybody in the group to donate some money to help do a private sponsorship that's been discussed. And I was really amazed because these were just sort of regular people, not super rich or anything, but in less than a month we raised over $40,000 with just sort of people opening up their wallets, wanting to do something to help. And this enabled us to have enough money to sponsor a family of 5 or actually a little bit more. So in doing this, we are not on our own, so we're actually working to bring over family members of some family, the Ama family, that are already here in Vancouver. They're actually here tonight, and it's so great to see them here. So they actually came as refugees themselves several years ago and have just done amazing things in the community. Like, I've just been blown away by getting to know them and hearing about all of their accomplishments in so little time. And if you speak to them afterward, you'll be amazed by how much English, how beautiful their English is. And so it's just been wonderful to get to know them. And we've also been working with the Shaughnessy Heights United Church, which is a sponsorship agreement holder that helps to make this possible. Doing this room? That's okay. So here we are, our groups, members of our group with members of the Ama family who are currently here in Vancouver, having a picnic at Pitts Beach. So it was really fun. We learned to play kind of a version of Syrian dodgeball that was actually kind of terrifying to us. But being part of this group has actually helped me to experience firsthand some of the ideas that my research lab here at UBC actually studies. So I do research on money and happiness and how we can turn one into the other. And a lot of my research suggests that one of the best ways we can turn money into happiness is actually to use it to benefit other people. So for example, in one of the first studies that we ever conducted on this topic, we went out on our beautiful campus here at the University of British Columbia and handed people either a $5 or a $20 bill, which we asked them to spend by the end of the day. But there was a catch. We told half the people they had to use this money to benefit somebody else. Meanwhile, we told half the people they had to use this money to benefit themselves. So before I tell you what we found, let me give you an idea of how people spend their money when they're handed some extra money on the UBC campus. So when we gave them this money and told them to spend it on themselves, what we call personal spending, they did things like buying makeup and jewelry and really an incredible amount of food and drinks. In contrast, when we gave them the same amount of money but told them to spend it on others, what we call pro-social spending, they still bought lots of food and drinks, but now they shared it with other people. In addition, some of our participants made donations to charity, and one student bought a toy for a younger sibling. Now the question is, which type of spending would leave people happier by the end of the day? Well, when we called people back that night, we found that people who'd been randomly assigned, basically by the flip of a coin, to spend this money on others, felt significantly happier at the end of the day. Now, we started to wonder whether these effects that we were seeing were maybe specific to Vancouver or Canada. We also ran some studies in the United States. We started to wonder if we were really seeing kind of a North American phenomenon. But we thought maybe, just maybe, this is actually a more deep-seated aspect of human nature. So we set out to conduct parallel experiments in countries around the world, and just to tell you about one, we collected data in both Canada and the East African nation of Uganda, and in both countries we asked people to look back and vividly reflect on a time where they had spent their own money, either on themselves or on somebody else. Now, as you might imagine, the kinds of spending experiences that people described differed pretty dramatically between these two countries. So when we asked people to tell us about a time they'd spent money on others, one person in Canada wrote, I spent $20 for 2 dozen red roses for my mother's birthday. Got them at Costco, so that's super nice. Meanwhile, given the same exact instructions, one person in Uganda wrote, last month I gave money to a friend to buy medication for his aching ulcers. Now, to be honest with you, when I was sitting in Uganda reading through these surveys, I thought to myself, okay, we are not going to replicate what we saw in Canada. These kinds of spending experiences just seem so radically different. And yet, to my surprise, when all the data were in, we actually found exactly the same effect in both countries, whereby people in both Canada and Uganda felt happier when they looked back on a time where they'd spent their own money on others rather than on themselves. Now, the fact that we're able to detect this warm glow of giving in countries around the world, even in places where people are struggling to meet their own basic needs, suggests that this capacity to experience joy from helping others may be actually kind of baked in to human nature. And if that's the case, it's possible that we could detect a kind of early version of this warm glow of giving, even among very young children. So to put this idea to the test, I worked with a colleague of mine in developmental psychology. We brought in toddlers just under the age of 2 to our lab. Now, any parents in the audience will quickly recognize that children under the age of 2 just don't care that much about money. So we worked with the sort of toddler equivalent of gold, namely goldfish crackers. We gave toddlers a windfall of goldfish for themselves, as well as the opportunity to give some of those goldfish away to a puppet named Monkey. So I'm going to show you a quick video of one of the toddlers who completed our study.
Now I want you to meet my friend Monkey. Hello. Do you want to say hello? And Monkey back. We're going to play a game. Yeah. Look, Monkey has a bowl just like you. Yeah. But both you and Monkey don't have any treats. Oh no. You don't have any treats and neither does Monkey. That's right. But look. I found even more treats, and I'm going to give them all to you. Peace. But, you know, I don't see any more treats. Will you give one to Monkey? Yeah? Yeah.
goldfish for herself, but she was actually even a little bit happier when she got to give some of those goldfish away. And when we bring in dozens of toddlers to the lab and have their facial reactions coded by trained research assistants, this is what we see over and over again. So the fact that we're able to detect this warm flow of giving in countries around the world and even among very young children suggests that human beings may actually have a sort of fundamental, deep-seated capacity to experience joy from giving. But I want to be very clear. Simply emptying our wallets will not always make everybody happy all the time. Instead, our research points to 3 key ingredients that seem to be really important in turning good deeds into good feelings. And these 3 key ingredients are connection, choice, and impact. So people are most likely to experience joy from giving to others when they feel a real sense of social connection with the people that they're helping. In addition, choice matters. At least in North America, there seems to be no better way to sort of rob the pleasures of giving than to make people feel like they've been backed into a corner and forced to give. So you need to give people some autonomy or choice. And finally, the thing that matters perhaps most of all is impact. So people are more likely to experience joy from giving when they can vividly understand the impact that their generosity has had. Now, I think since we're running a little over time, I'm going to skip telling you about some of the experiments in which we demonstrated these ideas, but trust me, if you Google my name, you can read lots and lots of nice academic papers about this topic. But I just want to maybe speak to how I see these ingredients coming into play in private sponsorship. So I think private sponsorship is a really exceptional opportunity to experience these key ingredients in spades. So for me, even though the family that we're trying to help hasn't arrived yet, we've already had the opportunity to get to know the Amma family, and that's been a really meaningful experience for our whole group. There's also a lot of, and of course, beyond that, we'll get to go meet this family at the airport when they finally do arrive, and so that's just an opportunity for connection with the people that we're helping that you just can't get from writing a check to UNHCR. Also, of course, there's an element of choice. We've had to make a number of decisions along the way, so that there's plenty of room for autonomy here. And finally, I think impact is really, again, the key ingredient. I think, when you write a check or hit submit on a donation opportunity for whatever organization is helping refugees, that's a wonderful, great thing to do. And of course, I would very much encourage everybody to do it. But of course, it requires a little bit of a leap of faith. Like, I hope that this will make a difference for somebody somewhere. And what I think is so amazing about the private sponsorship program is that, we're going to get to see how this family's life is transformed through helping them. And that's just, for us, just from a purely, I guess you could call it selfish perspective, that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for Canadians to have, to be able to see how their actions of, say, donating $1,000 or something is actually making a real difference in the lives of these individuals. I would also just add, this is perhaps a bit more speculative, but the circle in white there is my son Oliver, being held by my husband Mike, my sort of hope or dream is that someday when the family finally arrives, that Oliver will get to play with that family's children who will be about his age, and that he would get to grow up playing with them and getting to know members of from a diverse culture, as well as seeing that we really care about helping others and reaching out to people in faraway places to help them. And I think that's a much more effective way to communicate with children than just to tell them that helping matters. Even if you don't particularly care about the happiness of Canadians, clearly the benefits to refugees should be central. But a point I just want to make in closing is that our research also shows that the more people experience joy from having given in the past, the more likely they are to choose to give in the future. And so I think we sit on the cusp of an amazing opportunity in Canada where there's this motivation to give. There's this amazing opportunity through the private sponsorship program to have this incredibly rewarding experience of giving, and that can actually foster a more generous society. Now, as a happiness researcher, I hate to end on a downer, but I would say that the downside here is that this program has been hamstrung recently. It's been, there's been so many delays. It's very frustrating. There's a sort of wellspring of people that want to help, and I think we really need to advocate for the government to facilitate these kinds of sponsorships, because they provide not only a way to benefit refugees, which is incredibly important, but also to increase the happiness of Canadians and build a more generous society. So thank you.
Thank you for your research, but also for masterfully weaving it into your own experience and the topic of this evening. I do appreciate that the time is over. Lindsay, should we discuss or have any time for questions? Okay, so a couple of questions from folks. I think we're probably a small enough room that we should be able to hear each other. I did want to, just as you're thinking about putting your hand up here, did want to mention that there is the for this evening. Information about it is in the brochures, and that is happening at 7:30, so we do have time, and I'll give you a few more details on that. But any questions for any of our panelists or comments that you may have?
I have a question for you, please.
Standing just so
Yeah,
people can
sure.
hear.
I just wondered if you could elaborate on the effect of social media. I was interested in that last point at the end, and I wanted to know what you saw the effect was.
Yeah, absolutely. So social media in general has been a really significant part of the refugee resettlement piece. Social media, what social media has done, and I'm only going to speak locally, I'm not going to speak globally, because I know that globally there's been a large effect from social media as well. But we'll speak locally and what's happening in the province of BC. So what it has done is it has allowed families to remain connected with each other once they've come and settled in those 55 communities that I was talking about earlier. So, you know, there's been amazing opportunities for families to connect in with each other, to see what's happening in other communities. There's been some challenges that have come with that. You know, some communities are better prepared and have better resources. And so there has been some concerns from families that, you know, the families in one area or one community are able to receive access to services or access to housing that maybe they're not able to receive. So there have been some challenges for settlement service agencies around making sure that services and resources that are provided are as kind of unified across the board as much as possible. But that obviously can't always happen. But what it has done is it's also provided an amazing vessel for advocacy and self-advocacy. And one of the things that we know about refugees is refugees are strong, resilient people who fight for their rights. And so they are, we're seeing refugees using social media now to advocate for themselves and really express their own voice. And it's provided amazing opportunities for them to right off the ground start these kind of this dialogue around self-advocacy, which is an amazing thing to see, and it's something that we really do need to be supporting them in doing. It does pose some challenges, but those are challenges that are definitely not insurmountable. I think the benefits far outweigh the risks.
Thank you. Thanks. We'll take another question.
Thank you very much. It's just both a comment and questions. I would take a common thread between the different presentations. I'm both a UBC PhD candidate, and I'm working also with the Syrian refugees, and particularly in non-governmental organizations. I have three scenarios that are not imaginary, but this is real situations of people. I have seen refugees come in and say, the government allowance is almost the end. They have been here for about 11 months, and they didn't have. And just the fear on his face, I'm afraid I want to go back, but I have no home to go back. This is the first scenario. The second scenario is that families with large numbers, having 5, 6, and 7, and people have been really benefited from the generosity of Canadians, and I'm Canadian too. But after 1 year, they need to look for another house, because this is 1 year when we have this media and there's propaganda, and people, have been supporting. The third thing is that service providers are doing a great job, but the issue is that when we don't have the language support that is needed, when people go to BC housing and found nobody is speaking Arabic, when I personally have to be in a delivery room because Women's Hospital didn't find an interpreter for women who was delivering the twins, this is a big issue for us. What I noted personally for 1 year working in that is that we have funding, but we have a differentiated way of looking at the thing. This is my point of view, and I assume my responsibility in that. We have brilliant people who are doing a great job, putting all their efforts, but the problem is that we are not pulling all the strings together at the same time. Hundreds of programs of language, and sometimes we have a language program with 2, 3, 1. So we don't have this capacity of doing a working group. I think that, and I commend on my colleague, she's in ETSC, I'm an ETSC student also, we can do better, and particularly UBC. I had Syrian refugees suffering from teeth problems. Where is the school of dentistry here? What are the, so these are practical things that we are talking about. When people couldn't sleep because they had pain on their teeth, and I'm just, looking for volunteer doctors to do that. So we need to have a set of working group of people from different departments, from different sectors, to think of a strategic way to help the service providers or non-profit organizations, because UBC has a lot of potential, has a lot of professors, has a lot of students who can help in any ways. Like, Dr. Almond, she says, it's not only about giving money, it's about giving time, understanding, collaboration, guidance. So 1 year to be sponsored by the government, I think from my own personal perspective, is too short to get these people to have not only like a charity, because we want them to be, contributing citizens. They are already permanent residents. So these are all the questions that I address to this kind of public here, because we need to take these kind of considerations. We are dealing with the future of a lot of Canadian citizens. The average family members that I deal with is about 5 to 6 kids. Most of the refugees I have dealt with are under the age of 35. So we don't want these young people to be on welfare. We don't want these young kids to go to schools and go back to their homes with a pile of pages that the parents, they don't understand.
I think you're definitely outlining very, very real and challenging, complicating issues. With the point about the year being over and the kind of reaction from people who saw the picture of Alan and were motivated to act, have perhaps forgotten that other people's lives are going on, and there's very, very challenging situations. I think I also really appreciate the comment around what can UBC do more of. And these panels are certainly very interesting, but hoping and perhaps there can be throughout these discussions much more of a legacy and not as we did a week of discussions. But what kind of responsibility and action might come out of some of these discussions? But I very much appreciate your comments. I do want to respect the time of the people in the room here. It's we've gone quite over. And I also do want to just give a minute to Salim. Yes, Salim. Salim is from Mosaic, and there's some information in the back. But just wanted to say a couple of words before we close.
Hi, good evening. Normally it takes me hours to talk, but I will keep it really short. I was hearing the panelists, and honestly I could relate to each one of them. So, Paul, thank you for sharing the story. I came to Canada as a refugee, and it took me 7 days to walk to get to the border, and it's a challenge. So to come here, it's really amazing to be in front of you here to talk about the WUSC program. Sarah, you are doing an amazing job, and you know what? At Mosaic, we have really good connection. Our executive director was actually the graduate of the WUSC program in the 70s. So after the first person admitted to the program. When Elizabeth was talking about the Friends of Refugees, that's what I do at my organization. We work with private sponsors and try to connect and find individuals to do amazing work to bring refugees here. Last year, I was approached by Noor and the wonderful Arab students of the UBC, STANT, and Social Justice, and others. They approached me and they said, we really want to raise money and be part of the support that's provided to refugees. And you know what? They managed to raise $10,000 for my program. And what I did with it, they entrusted me with the money, and I entrusted them to make sure that we deliver what we said we would deliver. From last year until now, when the money was raised, 3 of my team are not paid by any funder, and we rely on the good generosity of everybody to do the work. We managed to find private sponsors for 170 individuals. So can you imagine? We managed to find a way for 170 individuals to be saved from the terrible refugee camps or the countries of neighboring countries of Syria to come to the country. 22 of them are here, and others like the Ahmed family are in process. So I really encourage you to keep the conversation and the discussion. What happens is really amazing. There are some shortfall, but you know what? The families of 6 or 8 or 10, they are doing much better here than in a refugee camp. So we have to look at it from that. The Canadians have done an amazing job, and honestly, when I look at it, from the Governor General coming to visit Mosaic and saying that his 3 kids are involved in private sponsorship. And then you go to grade 5 students telling me that they are preparing care packages for refugees and everybody in between. So the whole campaign is really amazing. It's 2-3 minutes, but I will leave it at this. If you want to know more about what we do, and we appreciate donations if you guys want to help, the $10,000 investment that was made, I would be more than happy to talk to you. I will be here tomorrow and the day after. And thank you very much for the opportunity, and all the best. Thank
you, and thanks to all of you. If you do want any more information about the opera, that is happening at 7:30, how to get there, cost, there are some tickets left. Just see Lindsay or myself or other folks around. And thanks so much for the panelists as well for your time.